because all three of you have experience in pen and paper composition. Is that something you still actively keep up with? And maybe answer.
Sure, yeah, I do, not necessarily for advertising per se. When the sessions happen, yes, we put music on paper. But I don't necessarily compose for ads on paper. But I did go through the whole, piano lessons at 3 years old, and had to handwrite all my scores for my college applications. It was cool. I think that did give me some sort of grounding in that I became adept at what the tool set is. That you understand the rules, so to speak, of how to elicit a certain thing based on the harmony or on the melody or something like that. Feel free to jump in. Just
Yeah, I would say I'm really a songwriter at heart, and so even when I'm working on completely, instrumental underscore, a lot of times when I'm talking to myself about the structure or talking to a client about the structure, I speak in songwriting terms, this is where we want the bridge, this is where we want the B section. Honestly, my journey into writing for advertising sort of happened around a trend in advertising, which is what often happens, is that something becomes really hot for a while, and if you have credibility and authenticity in that style, you can get your foot in the door. So to flesh that out, it's 1998, it's the end of it's sort of the later days of the first tech boom, and everybody's using techno, which is now called EDM, but everybody's using house music, techno, in their car commercials, in their armed services commercials, which I was part of. And I happened to just be a kid that was going clubbing with his brother, and I was good with technology, and I knew the studio, and I knew how to make those sounds, and I also had the language of structure as a songwriter, so I knew I could take a shift at this point in the picture, and that's how I kind of got into it. So and I only got called for techno for about 3 or 4 years, and then I was able to start working on things outside of that style. So
pen and paper. It's rare that I would use it to write anything for commercials because it's so truncated. But if I need to work out some melody or something for something longer, yeah, I'll absolutely start to kind of backtrack, start there, and then go to the computer. But yeah, I mean, it's a great foundation to have. I wouldn't have a career now if I didn't learn what I learned in college. If I couldn't have done, no one would have put me in front of 60 musicians if I didn't really know what I was doing, and college gave that to me. And the other thing that college gave me was versatility. I could work on jazz, I could work on orchestral work, I could do a popcorn chart, I could do a tango, I could do Italian music that sounded like it was Italian music, stereo, whatever it was. There was a very broad. I had a very broad education of music from around the world, so I knew enough that I could create things that were legit.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think I want to keep digging into sort of this idea of a toolkit. You mentioned that word, and I liked it. It was these things belong in my skill set. They're very specific to me, but there's also some general ones you need compositionally to be able to exist in a media sport, but not necessarily everything that you learn in a formal composition degree. What would you say your, this could be even technical setup, what is your toolkit? What is necessary for someone to have to survive in ad scoring?
thick skin.
Well, I'm getting to that, because there's another toolkit, right, which is how to deal with all the personalities involved in the decisions by committee thing that happens to you.
But musically, you're saying.
Musically, let's start musically, and then we'll talk about people. We'll talk about
well, sort of jumping off what Lou was saying about what he learned in college. I often talk about this. I actually didn't take a lot of composition in college. I studied ethnomusicology, and I feel like that was really important to being successful in a position where I'm speaking directly to clients, and that's not, I mean, that's not always the experience, particularly now if you're a freelancer, you may be, 5 people behind that client conversation, but I feel like I really excelled in those situations where they came in and sat down and, tried to understand what you were doing, which meant you had to try to explain it in terms that they could understand as non-musicians. And then they might come back with, feedback. And really, most of the work of advertising scoring over the years has been revision, not writing. From my perspective, it's the life of a composer.
Writing the music's the easy part.
That's your
Basic.
start point. But almost everything's written in revision, and sort of being able to have that dialogue with people who don't have music theory, don't have music technology awareness, being able to describe what you're doing and sort of understand that thing that they're saying in garbled language, writing about music from different cultures and writing these long papers in those classes really gave me that vocabulary. And so I always think about that communication is sort of one of the big skills, I think, being able to translate what you do to someone who doesn't have that vocabulary that,
Yeah. But this is interesting that you're all sort of jumping ahead to this other toolkit.
Yeah.
You're like, it doesn't actually matter over here. The big things are relational.
I think it's a step process. So let's say you're going to write an orchestral track. If your samples sound like a 1080 from 1995, you're not getting to the point where you get to talk about revisions. So really the baseline is, are you creating a piece of music that sounds like a finished piece of music for air? If it doesn't sound like that, with rare exceptions, you're already 3 steps behind. So that skill set of, can you record well, can you mix well, can you write a cohesive piece of music? Can you write a cohesive piece of music that has relevance to the visual? Because we can all interpret a visual in a different way, and there's different, there's always more than one answer. But whatever you're doing has to be relevant and make sense. So it's kind of the creating a great piece of music that sounds great to the average listener, which is probably a lower bar than you might for some other musician friend. But it's still an extremely high bar. I mean, it really has to be good. And then you get to the next point of what really, in my opinion, what separates a professional from an amateur, of being able to take feedback, interpret that feedback, and have good options that should be addressing what you're being asked to do. You can't have a lot of ego. It's not like what I've written is right. It's not. It may be right for you, and it's a great answer, but it's not the right answer in this particular situation. There are other people who are kind of guiding what's going on. That doesn't mean you can't have suggestions and ideas. No one's going to say no to more options, but you need to be hitting the mark that you're being asked to hit as best you can, and that's a skill that takes a long time. It took me a really long time to pick up that skill, because you're being given words that, what does that really mean?
Jumping off from that point, are you guys still, in this point in your careers, are you still demoing for projects, or are companies coming to you knowing exactly what you can give them?
Yes and yes. I think, you get, you build, like you said, if you have a skill set that I think the most successful people I've seen in advertising and in film and media scoring as a whole are people who are really passionate about what they're doing, and they're pursuing the thing that they enjoy doing and that they're good at, and that it shows when you hear like somebody performing their music or recording it. it comes out as this is good. So you get known to do something, and certainly people will be like, well, that's the go-to person for this. But that doesn't mean that I maybe want a project, and so I'm going to chase it in a way that I might put in the extra work to demo on my own accord. Or somebody just might call me and say like, hey, Eric, we have $250. Like, you want to get down on this 30-second thing, and it's techno. And it's like, yeah, sure, great. I'll spend a couple of hours on this, get this done. Maybe I win, maybe I win a couple $1,000s, maybe I don't. I do it, I don't think about it, and then it's moving on to the next one. So in that sense, I'm not like thinking about it like, oh, I demoed for this, and like my life is on the line, and I put out my masterpiece, and Ravi shut it down. It's like, this is the worst techno I've ever heard. It's like, you know, I mean, like, now I'd be like, oh, this is the worst. It's like, great, sounds good, here's the demo invoice. Yeah, it's like, here's the demo invoice, great, like, I'll take my cash and keep on moving. Yeah, that's my.
Yes, I still demo, but we also, particularly on the gaming side, we're commissioned because they just think about creative work and relationships differently. Advertising is kind of a cruel place. But there's a question.
Yeah.
Can we take a question at this point?
Well, let's maybe finish just this bit.
Yeah.
We'll get to the questions after.
Okay. Yeah. So, but you know, getting back to something that Lou said, you know, in terms of the toolkit, technically speaking, I mean, it really is. You know, you are a composer, you're a mix engineer, you're a recording engineer, you're a mastering engineer. You know everything about post-production. You know, we've done presentations for where we're demoing, and of course we're working our butts off. I'm working my butt off as a composer, writing a couple of pieces of music. We're hiring a whole bunch of freelancers to also write pieces of music, and then I sit there and we put it into a post-mix setting where we actually sit there and just make every demo sound like it's mixed for air, because that is the bar that has been established at this point. There's really nowhere else for it to go. It has to, you know, if not only does your music have to sound amazing, but you have to actually find exactly how to mix it with the voiceover so that they don't have that moment where it
jumps out.
It's overpowering the voiceover, so they're scared to use it because it's going to step on it. Or you've mixed it too conservatively, so your piece translates as weak and not powerful and emotional in points where you need it to be because you're not hearing it behind the voice. So it's from a technical standpoint, that toolkit really, you know, is important.
Yeah.
And
how does one learn that? Is that just over time?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I started, like literally, when I got that first job, I had never recorded anything. I had never put up a microphone. I hadn't touched a computer to do music.
They just threw you in.
So, and I was dealing with consoles and 2-inch tape machines. So it was, and you know, I was horrible. I was a horrible engineer. It took a really long time and really engineering is one of those things where there are some basic guidelines, I suppose, but in truth, every situation is different. Every voice sounds different. Every instrument, when it's recorded, sounds different. So it's kind of be when I look online and I see these people and it's like, what's your vocal chain? You know, your vocal mix chain. It's like, I don't have one. I couldn't have one because every vocalist sounds different on every day. They sound different. Even if I put up the same mic with the same vocalist, it's not the same. It's definitely a skill where you just have to do it a ton. The more you do, the better you get. You know, it's always good to have a reference track. So if you're creating a piece of music in a particular genre, have something just from a sonic quality standpoint, so you can kind of use that as a reference point of, is it as bright, is it as warm, is it as punchy, is it as, you know, whatever the comparisons are, will get you there a little quicker. Because your ear gets tired and you get, you know, ear deaf and tunnel vision as to what you're doing.
I was just going to jump off from that to add to the technical toolkit thing in terms of like learning all this stuff. It really is just time where you want it to be a situation where the tools aren't like getting in your way. Like you're not like, oh, this is like the kick drum's not punchy. Like if you know the kick drum's not punchy, then you want it to be like 10 seconds away from being punchy. not like, which compressor should I use? What EQ? You just want to be like, okay, great, they said the bass is impactful enough, like, let me move this here, get this frequency out. And that is really just like because you did it 1,000 times and you got rejected 999 times, which is probably true. I mean, like the list of folders, I think, for a freelancer of like jobs of commercial like titles or whatever, like the folders in your like jobs folder.
Yeah.
It looks ridiculous when you start like looking at it. You're just like, oh wow, every corporation like ever is making a commercial, and so you don't want to have to stop and think like, oh, how do I like create music? That's like I said, that's the baseline part. It's like these people will call. It's sort of how do you then just continue to do it so you start winning. That was a lot.
Yeah, it was.
So-
And so most often when you're demoing for an ad, is it being temped? Is there or are the reference tracks in place?
A little bold. I think there's so I'll back up to a second to say that I'm in this peculiar spot where because I have literally a company name and a studio, that sometimes music houses think of me as a company and I don't necessarily chase the direct work where like I'm trying to get the like ad agency thing going on. I would much rather deal with a musician and have like my conversation with the music person be like, great, the strings are sticking out a little bit, like what if you brought this down an octave? Oh cool, like that's the note, like great. And then I execute it and then they're happy and we move on. That's just my opinion because I wanted to put my energy into like other film and television stuff. But the company version of it, where it's like in terms of demoing and temp tracks, it's an interesting thing because I think if you're getting the direct work from the agency, there is a moment where you can pitch your own creative vision. You know, your idea is valuable, like at that level, you're being called on as an expert, they're paying you X amount of dollars. Maybe it's a single bid job where they're only coming to you and they're like, we're doing this, I don't know, what did we do? We did a litter commercial where they wanted us to come up with like a bluegrass like jingle that the cats were gonna sing. And so like, yeah, like we could, then it was like great, like I'll pitch you, you're like, yeah. It's like you pick, then you like it was on me to pitch the songs that I kind of wanted to be like in charge of, like, okay, we're gonna recreate this sound. This is the vibe for this. Versus more like if a music house called me, generally speaking, there would be a temp track and or a reference track that was like, Eric, this is your direction, we want you to go down this path, this is like, execute this, I'll ask a few questions and then we'll go from there.
How is it predominantly happening for you guys? Are you working
I've seen thousands of temp tracks over the last 20 years, yes. Often the same ones. Over and over and over. There's a few there.
Can you deduce, can you boil down why certain tracks are very, very popular?
Yeah, I mean, what was around for really, like, Mark Mothersbaugh.
That's what
Is
John Bryan.
John Bryan gets on there a lot. And I think the two things that they have in common is it's a little bit unique, there's a quirkiness to it, and they're small. So they work really well against something that's really wordy.
I also think there's a little bit of a human element in them, which might be making like a weird comeback right now with everything being
There's an authenticity.
Yeah, there's an authenticity that you're like, that a person played the wrong note on that mandolin, like, and it somehow sounds right.
Yeah, it's got a real handmade quality to it. So those things I think all resonate, and they work really well for an act.
Yeah. Interesting.
Temp music reference tracks are just, they're absolutely always going to be part of this.
Yeah.
And I always kind of like, going back to what I was saying about vocabulary, for a lot of people we work with, who aren't musicians, but they're creating a piece of media that needs music, and it's their baby, or it's their boss's baby, or it's their client's baby. Like they have something, they have a sound in their head. They have a notion of what they're going for and why they're going for it, and they can't put that into words, but they can put a piece of music on there that makes them feel that way. So the big thing for me over the years has been, you know, how do I figure out what that piece is doing for them functionally, like, and what is it doing for that piece of media, rather than just like looking at it as this object I need to recreate in the studio. Okay, it's got this piece and that piece, and I'll make something that has a different chord progression. Because that ultimately usually feels less satisfying, and then it can also, you know, land you in that position where you're now being pushed to make, you know, decisions that are not legal as a composer, and you don't want to be in that position. You want to give them something that magically makes them feel the same way, but is completely unique to your voice and to what you can bring to the project.
Do you have sort of like, before you even start working, or at this point in doing this work for how many years, do you have questions that you ask that help you get there faster? Client? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not gonna share.
Yeah, no.
It's a secret.
Well, so my secret is that, like, ad agencies, you know, have like account people who are actually, you know, trying to get the work and get the brand to go from point A to point B. And then they have their creative teams who are like the hip creative people who come up with the crazy ideas that get their brand from point A to point B. And then as a composer, if you're on the front lines talking to the agency, you're either talking to the creative team or you're talking to their broadcast producer or music producer. And often those people in that room try to boil it down to a music brief, and they give you that music brief. And we often ask the kind of questions that you would want to ask the account people, because those are the most revealing questions. Like, what did you think of the last campaign? You know, how is this, you know, what is this piece supposed to do, you know, for your brand in terms of bringing it to a different marketplace? Because that'll tell you why they chose that temp track.
Mm-hmm.
They often won't tell you why they chose it. They're just like, we like this thing. But if you can kind of get into their minds and into the minds of the people who actually have their jobs on the line for that campaign working and moving the needle, you can kind of start to figure out, you know, where they're going, and that makes you a little bit more prepared for the revision process.
Yeah.
That's my secret. Is try to talk to the account people or ask questions that the account people would be able to answer.
And I guess I want to then circle back to a word that you said earlier, which was satisfying, and finding satisfaction in this revision process. How have you come to define satisfaction in your work? Is that terrible?
It's like a therapy session.
Yeah.
No,
Satisfied are you?
so I think, in terms of your first question, I do enjoy the dialogue with musicians that I respect, and like that revision process where somebody maybe more experienced than me, or somebody who did speak to the brand or whatever, you know, and has more insight and is able to give me clear direction. Like, that's helpful. I want to win the spot, and I'm not trying to do a good job. So like having somebody actually direct me musically feels satisfying. Like, oh right, I should have saw that. Like, I'll remember that next time, or something like that. When I get to like version 13 and it's revision 15 of version 13 or whatever, it's just like, all right, people, like what can I do to like just edit the paint? Like, this just needs to go, or like I'm done. Like, and get somebody else, and a little bit of that where I want to just move on to the next thing, and where I find satisfaction in that commercials, they move so quickly, generally speaking, that you don't really get hung up on any in one individual thing. It's like, oh, great, I'm going to just keep going, and I'm going to do a jazz chart tomorrow. I'm going to do pop music, you know, tonight. I'm going to do strings tomorrow. And so that, for me, for like my sort of like, I don't know, ADD personality, really keeps me engaged. Like, I really feel good about trying out these different things and seeing what I'm good at, figuring out like, oh, I really don't know how to make my kick drum punchy. I should like look into this. Like, let me like get better at that, and then I'll spend some time doing it. And then I try to still write music that I actually want to write, because ultimately, although I do think that there's a craft and, dare I say, an art form to this, I'm not looking at what I'm producing for commercials as art. I'm trying, like, it's a collaboration. I want to sell the thing that's going to sell it for somebody else. And then when I'm making my music, I can have more control over it. You know, like for a film, like I would much more speak up about 10 tracks or for, you know, give my opinion about the direction of the film or something like that. But for a commercial, if this is going to move the needle for AT&T, then I want it to move the needle.
Yeah, I mean, you want to speak?
Yes, no, you can do that.
I mean, I feel like you can't win or be successful if you aren't able to at least have like 5 moments of bliss when you are finishing your mix and you love that piece of music, like it's your child. Like you have to have that level of engagement. I've had composers, contact our company and be like, this is the music I write for advertising, and it's like really kind of just flat. And it's like, don't send me that. Send me what you're excited about. It's not music for advertising. It's just music. Ultimately, like I have to have on a regular basis, and it's not on every project, but on a regular basis, I have to have at least a few minutes where I'm like really excited to hit play on that file and hear what I just made. And then you have to send it out into the world, and like it's 18, it's not your responsibility anymore. It has its own.
It made its own choices.
Yeah, you send that child out and let it the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
And then I think I used to, when I was younger, I was maybe more idealistic about like, well, it'd be great to have my vision on this piece and that original thing that I wrote. And now I'm actually most satisfied when I can, like, the most satisfying moments are when the dumbest idea I can make, like, successful and like, make it sound brilliant and make the person who said that on the call feel like they're brilliant. Like, that's satisfying now.
Yeah.
And because it is a collaborative medium and you can't think of it as your own thing. It really is in dialogue with other people's ideas.
Yeah.
But when I can make someone feel like a genius for that idiotic thing that they just mentioned, that's awesome.
That's a cool benchmark.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
When I'm allowed, when someone will let me, I generally try to throw out what everyone asked for and do something completely different. A lot of my career has been spent doing that and completely striking out. But when it hits, it really hits. So it's not uncommon. I did something a couple years ago where I think I ended up doing it was like a big band mambo, and it had that word never came up anywhere. I don't think anyone was in. I write it, I send it off. The feedback is they didn't think it was right for the brand. They did all kinds of other things. About 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later, I get a call. Hey, they really like that track now. So, you don't know.
Yeah.
You really never know.
Yeah.
Mambo King.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you? Okay, I'm gonna get us into the weeds if I don't consult my talking points here. So Anne put together some cool bullet points about what the crowd might be interested in learning about. But let's take the temperature. How many people in here are composers? Okay. Okay, great. How many people compose for advertising? Okay, cool. How many people are looking to break into advertising? Okay, cool. So maybe let's just start there, like bare bones. Like if you were to give advice to someone who wanted to be in this industry, where might they start?
It's great.
Did you just say run?
Yeah, I said run far away.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. I have revisions all day. But no, it's, I think, this is jumping off a little bit what they were saying in the previous question, but it's the same thing. I think you want to do good music always. Like, that is how you get noticed. I feel like if somebody would say like, yeah, that's the thing that I want on my team, you know, and it seems like really simple, but it is a very, and I'm guilty of it too, starting out, you know, you want to put out like 10,000 tracks and you're like, I can do everything. Here's my big band, here's my thing, here's my whatever. And then it all boils down to like, well, actually, what am I excited about? Like, what am I really going, I mean, yes, you want to show that you're adept at everything in some way, but that might not be the first card you reveal that like, I can do everything or whatever. If they, Siri's listening to me.
Siri does not get it.
Oh, I got a full like text to type here, what I just said.
Saving it for later.
In terms
Brilliant
of
advice.
like technical advice, I would say get whatever DAW that you can, that you work the fastest in, and practice. Like take some commercials off YouTube and rescore them. Nobody wants to see a rescore per se, but like do the good music, because that music should exist outside of the video. Like you could just take that MP3 and send it to somebody and be like, hey, listen to my new track. Like I just put this out on Bandcamp or whatever, and it's like, oh wow, that's a cool track. Like if you do that until you feel comfortable, then you're like, I've got like 2 or 3 good tracks to be sending to somebody that this is my thing. Because I think people take notice. Like I certainly take notice when it's like if somebody sends me a link, I'll click on it and then I usually forget. But if in that like first 5 seconds, it's like, oh, that was bad. Like let me listen to another 5 seconds, which is, I mean, unfortunately, how much anyone is usually giving me at this point.
Yeah, I would say, like, having a specialty is good in the beginning of your career. Being like really good at one thing might make you more remembered by someone who's never worked with you before, particularly if they're, as somebody who I write, but I also, you know, work with my partner to bring together teams of writers on bigger projects, and so sometimes we look beyond our cast of usual characters, and it's usually, particularly if it's a very specific style we're looking for. So I feel like the jack of all trades thing was very important when I was getting started, even though, as I mentioned, I was only hired for techno for about 4 years. But I really do think it's like that flexibility is good once you're established, because it'll allow you to continue your relationships, so that if you can show people you're already working with, hey, I can also do this, you might, you know, start to get the job based on comfort level rather than based on mastery of that one specific thing that needs to be done on that project. But I think for starting out, having something you're really passionate about that's like your genre is always a good starting point. And also, from my perspective, we pitch so much when we should be demoing, and that's just the way the business has gone. So I don't want to say turn yourself into a stock music writer, although that's a big industry that could have a whole probably 5-hour panel about. But there's a lot of ways in which we function at the beginning of a project like a stock company, where we draw from a library that we've assembled from all of our composers in order to give people a lot of options very quickly. Sometimes we'll even, you know, I'll edit them to picture for a presentation. So oftentimes when I talk to writers that have approached my company, I'll ask them, you know, do you have music in the can that you can send over to us that we might be able to pitch? And you know, you're not sending it away to be used without your permission. That's not how we function, but you know, obviously get to know whoever you're sending it to. But I think it's in the original music for advertising community, I would be hard pressed to find a company that's not pitching a lot along with demoing. And so pitching requires material you can already send. And when people ask me, well, if I'm developing that library of music to send, what should I be writing? Should I be writing, you know, epic orchestral trailer music, or piano, you know, solo piano pieces? And I mean, it always depends on your relationships. You know, if you're friends with someone who works at a trailer house, yes, right? epic trailer music for that to send to that person. But when someone approaches me, I just say, well, write something that couldn't have existed, 2 years ago, because we have everything in our library that could have existed 2 years ago. But it's that style of music or that thing that's being done right now that just feels like it couldn't have existed 2 years ago. That's what we always need more of, because it doesn't exist yet. Or because, we've barely written it ourselves on demos. So that's my only advice on that.
Yeah, I would say, they've pretty much covered it, but, you should just be sending out what you think is your best stuff. And to his point, don't start with a lengthy intro. Get right to it. So you play and it's like, oh yeah, this is exciting. Not a, 4 bars of drone before things get going. Because no one's going to get past them.
Well, at most ed people, you're dealing with 30-second tracks anyway.
Yeah,
so 10 seconds is a lot of time.
Exactly, yeah. That's a lot. Yeah, it's an eternity. Yeah.
We're working on a lot of things that are 10 seconds long right now.
Well, 6 seconds is the YouTube pre-roll. Yeah. 6 is
Wow.
6 is.
I would also add to all of this, just be nice. That goes so much further than you would think. Like, being normal, and I don't mean that in we're all quirky, I'm super weird and like, we all, shit will hit the fan, and it's who is able to keep their cool and can kind of be okay with the fact that their revisions are gonna happen. Last minute things, an 8 a.m. call on a Sunday morning, or what, and of course you can set some boundaries up and whatever, but that ultimately, I think, from various commercial people that I've met, we're generally all easygoing, nice people, because you sort of have to be.
Yeah, and communication skills are key. If I'm working with a composer that's hard to reach, or either hard to reach they won't answer their phone or answer an email, or hard to reach in that I give them a set of notes and they don't really come back with those notes executed in the time that we talked about. That's imagine having 3 websites where you're gonna buy shoes, and 2 of them load really slowly and the 3rd one loads really quickly. Which one are you gonna buy the shoes from? It's like latency to me. It's if I can't get the revision done with the composer I'm working with, and I can't be in touch with that person and know that they got my message, that really, I just move on to people who are more in touch. So I think that's, being cool, being in,
Being
calm. Yeah.
Answering your phone, answering an email.
I wanted to go back to, the rescore thing. I don't mind looking at a rescore. What I really mind is when it's pitched, when it's sent to me as just with no context, hey, here's this Chevy commercial, and it's not the final version, it's a rescore, but they didn't tell me. And I found my own work rescored on people's websites before, and I was just it's fine, go rescore my commercial or anybody's, but just put a lower third title in iMovie, or if you're gonna send me a link, say this is a demo rescore. But I will say, when we are looking at composers to bring into projects, 99 out of 100 times, we think there's a possibility that it will have to be work to picture at some point if we're pitching existing materials. So it really does help to have work to picture that you can show, not just a set of music. If somebody just sends me, 12 amazing tracks, but they have nothing worked to picture, I don't have that confidence that they can actually do that.
This may seem like basic skills, but what do you, when a composer is contacting you to introduce themselves and talk about what they're about, what do you like to see?
I basically just that they're nice. Seriously, I'm more than happy. I like talking about music. I like hanging out with other musicians. People are usually friendly when it's sort of hey, let me show off all my skills right away because I'm trying to impress you. I have other things I need to do. I don't mean that in a condescending way. It's just sort of being sort of humble and waiting for that moment where there is a moment for you to get the demo out. Like, yeah, I want you to work with me too. Like, if you're a nice person, like, let's get it together. I'm probably in less of a spot than, say, Ravi is for like composers introducing themselves to me for that specific purpose. But I will say that I like hearing, like, it's really what we've all been saying. I mean, that like I like seeing that you are passionate about something. That like there is a voice to this. I mean, because that's ultimately all we can each do, right? Like if everyone could learn Logic or Pro Tools or DP or Cubase, and it's like you could figure out how to make a beat, and put a bass line on it, and we'll call it a day. And you get some royalty-free loops, and like, yay, I made a commercial. It's like, but any one of us could do that. So what's going to separate, me from you or you from me? It's sort of like that's your voice. So I think when it comes off as you being a real musician, a unique set of skills, then like, yeah, I want to hang.
I'm not qualified for that. So, I mean, I'm not hiring any composers, so I'm the wrong guy.
This really is for us.
So I see a lot of emails, and I kind of have a list of things now over the years that I figured out I like to see. First of all, I want it to be readable in the amount of time I have, so it can't be like, 5 pages.
Long emails.
But I would really like to know, just like a 2 or 3 sentence bio, like who are you, where do you come from, did you study music somewhere, were you in, are you an artist that was previously in a band that, was notable that I should know about. I really liked, and this is in addition to the, a visual reel of work to picture and any other music that we could add to our library for pitching purposes. And I know it's 2019, but I will say that it's still an issue with attachments once in a while. So like, it's got to be links, not attachments. But I like a small bio. I like to know, what's that one style of music that you're really passionate about, if you have one or two. Like what gets you really excited to write music? What's it can't be everything because I won't remember that.
Yeah.
I find it really helpful to know, like, if you play an instrument or sing or both. There are definitely situations where, for example, we know the creative direction is cello, and we know somebody who's a cellist and a composer, and that means that rather than having to have them write the track and then bring somebody in on that demo, we could get a live cello on the demo. And that's, those are the kinds of things that are really helpful. I also like to know what software you use, only because I'm a digital performer user and there's not many of us, and I always like to know who else is out there. And if they could take a session from me.
Have you always been in English?
Yeah.
I feel like DP's LA.
Yeah.
What do you
It
use?
just used to be. Well, I use Logic now, but I started on
I would say I use Logic primarily, but I've learned all of them from over the years, and I would in no way like say I'm an expert in any of them, but the ability to pick up in like this, what if a music house calls and says like, we need this done, and it's in digital performer, can you do it? Well, of course you say yes and you figure it out. But yeah, they're all very similar. They all just, it's a mixer is a different key command. You can modify the key commands.
If someone was starting out, what vow would you say they should learn?
I feel irresponsible answering that
Yeah.
with digital performer, because who knows if they'll be around in 5 years, but it's still my favorite for this industry.
I mean, I would say if I didn't know any software, I would probably force myself to use Cubase because it's so effective for the stemming of like your stems. It's like
Stemming of stems.
that you can in one print, without really any too much routing, like you can get a full print of all of your stems. That's less of an issue per se with advertising, but it's like when you have 35 cues and they all have 35 instruments, and you're soloing each track in Logic, it is the worst thing ever. I mean, that was one of my starting out jobs was for another composer. I worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, because he only had one computer with all the samples on it, and I had to print all of his stems one by one and check them to load them into Pro Tools. And that was just like, are you kidding? But like also it made me really meticulous about like how I do my stuff. And, you know, organization is key, and file naming is key, and all that sort of stuff. There's weird things about it that I feel like, you know, you kind of just have to go through to do, and maybe experiencing a DAW that you don't like is an okay thing. I started on Cubase, I went to Logic, I worked in VP when I was working for this guy. Now, I mean, I picked up Pro Tools over the years.
Yeah, I could no more tell you what DAW to use than who your significant other should be. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very intimate relationship.
It's gonna, like,
There's only 5 choices.
like, you want to think of it as another instrument. You don't want to think of it as like it's a problem. Like that it's like I don't know how to load an instrument. Like it's like Fruity Loops can do it too. Like
Yeah.
do whatever you can.
I mean, in reality, other than GarageBand,
That's
which is severely limited in terms of you can't get MIDI out of it, as far as I can tell.
I don't think you can load a movie.
Yeah, we work with somebody who's working in GarageBand. But other than that, I will say it doesn't really matter. But it does matter that you understand how people using different software end up collaborating, because that happens all the time. You know, how to, you know, what stemming means, how to get MIDI out of your DAW effectively, which I've worked with some very experienced composers who have sent me, you know, MIDI files that are almost unusable. So this seems to be a problem in Logic, actually.
Yes,
Logic.
Yeah. So,
it's the old name.
but being able to understanding how to work with other people on projects effectively, because you know, it's very rare that I've ever had to hand off a digital performer session. To be honest, it's mostly just stems back and forth. So it doesn't matter. It's whatever gets you there.
They all are pretty comparable. Like whatever pluses or minuses one of them has, the other one kind of has a comparable thing too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean maybe Logic is the most like drag and drop user friendly style in that it's an Apple program, but that almost makes me trust them less. In that like I don't want to put all my eggs in Apple's basket. I would much rather like Cubase is usable on a PC and an Apple, and you know that has its benefits. So
I would also say if you come from like a concert music background, or you know, going back to your very first question, if you come from a pen and paper kind of mentality, in my teaching I've run into some students that are really interested in working in media more, and they end up with these workflows that are totally untenable for the speed at which we work at, where they're writing in Sibelius and then moving it over to like you can't do that. You just have to write in the DAW, and if you can't write in the DAW, I don't think you can move fast enough for this kind of work.
There's a bullet point from the poster for this event that I love. Interpreting creative direction from different clients. So maybe you could all give me an example of a note you got that flabbergasted you, and what you did about it, and how proud you were of yourself at the end when you figured it out.
there are so many. I mean, like, I used to keep like a little quote book of some like great quotes.
I can't believe that.
It's maybe been destroyed. But there was like a great one that like when this question gets asked, like it's like, can you bring some bass out of the treble, or maybe can you take some bass out of the high end? And I was like, what? What did you just say? And they were like, you know, take some bass out of the high end, and I was like, no problem. I can do it. I changed the EQ and it worked.
And they accepted this.
Yeah, I mean, but no, in terms of like a real like note of interpreting creative direction, I think it's always something that Lou was saying earlier, that like when you're able to throw out sort of the known creative direction, like it's Tempt with Hans Zimmer's Time, and it's like they've already hired 8 freelancers who are going to do a rip-off of Hans Zimmer's Time. And they're calling you and being like, yeah, this is the 10 track, they love the 10 track, like, just do the 10 track, but make it better. Like, well then you know that like if you're not producing the most amazing like mock-up of Hans Zimmer's thing, somebody else is. So why not take that moment to step back and be like, what is it about time that's does everybody know the peace time? Like, what is it about it that's like working for this client? What is the emotional like takeaway here? How do I do this with my own voice and like take my own direction? And those, and you know, it doesn't always work. It's sometimes I really enjoy writing the piece and then it doesn't win. But I would prefer to do that and then have that music house call me back a bunch of times because I'm giving them an original take. Then just know that I'm doing like the A- version of Hans Zimmer. Because somebody will be doing the A version, like, and somebody will be doing the A+ version, and maybe it's me, but probably not in that given moment. Is like if that's the brief, was like, hey Eric, like do this one thing, and we're telling 8 other freelancers to do it, then I'm gonna be like, great, I'm gonna maybe do that, and I'm gonna do this other thing because that's maybe where my heart lies. Doesn't always work, but it feels good.
Satisfaction. Do you guys have stories about interpreting for creative direction?
Probably too many. I mean, I can't think of any. I haven't had any of the, you know, can you make it purple or whatever. I mean,
What about iPhone messages? You've had clients like on nowadays, right?
no, that I have not.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, I would say the most puzzling thing is you'll often get asked to do 2 things that are completely opposite of each other.
Yeah.
The one thing, they can't both exist. They can't be louder and softer at the same time. They can't be. That happens a lot, and
Add more energy, but slow the tempo down.
yeah, and so it starts to become context of, okay, so what are they trying to achieve here? Pull back, forget about what they said, and kind of get to 30,000 feet and look at the big picture and what could that mean. And sometimes it clicks, but then sometimes it's just goofy stuff. I mean, I had a 30-minute conversation with Google about one piano note. It happens. And there wasn't a real creative solution other than.
Did you change the note?
I think we just got rid of it. Or, I don't really remember how we solved that one, but I mean those things happen.
I wish I had a better story for this answer. Like I know.
It always happens.
I'm sure
Yeah.
that
I
it has
Yeah.
multiple times. So.
Yeah.
I know I have like head exploding stories buried in there that
Try to
are
forget.
being pushed down.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like PTSD.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember working on a progressive commercial once where it was like this pop track and it had this great analog synth melody that was totally arpeggiated. It was like, and the client was like, can we have the singer sing that? And I was like, yes, the answer is always yes. And we had her sing it, and it was completely ridiculous. And sometimes, they need to play in that sandbox in order to get there.
Yes.
No one believes you. If you're like, well, that's probably not going to work, or that's not going to sound that great. No one cares.
It's somebody's idea. You want to honor
it's
it.
like, they often people need to hear what doesn't work to know what does work.
Yeah, and it's like, so one of the very simple strategies I developed over the years, it's psychology, I guess, I don't know, is that nobody likes conflict, but everybody likes more. So it's like, oh, and here's this other option I thought of, just in case this other thing's not working. I tried this other thing. You want to hear it too? I'll just send it as an alt. I love sending alt mixes of things because you can be like, yeah, I tried your thing, and just in
Here's
case.
what I want.
Yeah.
So give them a little extra,
Yeah, that's good advice. Let's take some questions. Okay, all right, you start.
Hi. Yeah, actually 2 questions.
Well, give us your best one, and we'll
My
save
best
your
one.
alt file.
I'm curious, so on the music house side, things have gotten very litigious, and copyright infringement and indemnification of the client is a big thing on our side. You guys touched on this very briefly when you were talking about reference tracks, but I'm curious, when you're actually sitting down to write, how do you avoid the fear of infringing, and how do you work with musicologists? I'm curious about that side of things.
I try to, if I know that the reference track is like a hot topic where it's like, this was like everyone's nervous about it, they've already tried to rip this off or whatever it is, they've tried to clear it. And in general, even when that's not the case, but specifically when that is the case, I will listen to it once or twice and then just like turn it off. It's like, great, they reference John Bryan, cool, I know what John Bryan sounds like now I'm doing like, oh, I'm gonna pick a quirky instrument, that's my decision, like, then I don't necessarily think of it. I think you do have to be extra careful though, because it is a thing of like, inevitably, like we all sort of unconsciously hear things and you're like, that melody sounds super familiar, and then at the end you play it back and you're like, oh my god, I did it. Like I just totally ripped that thing off. And so you have to throw it out and start over. But I think in the case of like trying the like fear of it, is then I just like I only listen to it once or twice. As opposed to say like dropping it in my session, like beat mapping it. Which is like maybe when I first started out, that was like, ooh, they love this reference track, I'm gonna beat map this and I'm gonna pick the same key. And then it's like, well, wait, I just made a flat version of this reference track that could have been better. And so I think sort of just taking the takeaway, again, when you were saying this, like the takeaway of what is this doing for the client as opposed to what is it like, you know, I'm gonna like, ooh, they went up a third, I'm gonna go up a fifth. Like, ooh, they went down, I'm gonna go up. Like, or whatever it is, because I made it one note different. Like, that always ends up sounding like not the thing that you're not happy, they're not happy, it's like, it's too close, but it's not close enough. So I just try to ignore it a little bit, but then I might not always win. But I think it's the right. Ultimately, too, there's a great story of, what is it, Gravity. Have you guys seen the movie? Not Gravity, Arrival. JoAnne scored it, and he wasn't eligible to be nominated for an Oscar because they used some of Max Richter's music. And Max and JoAnne are buddies, and they also have the same agency. And so JoAnne, like, they temped it with Max, and he heard the thing, and he was like, oh, that's brilliant. Like, that's the thing. Like, we should use this music. And he's like, the director was like, great, so, like, you're going to do your version of this. And he's like, okay, fine, like, I'll try. And he did his version, and it wasn't what the director wanted. And he was like, look, I'm not doing another version. Like, I would revise this if you want, but I think Max's music is better. Like, I know his agent. Like, we're going to call him, we're going to make a deal. Like, let's license this music and not make this. And now, of course, there was tons of money on the line, and it wasn't a problem. But, like, in that case, it's sort of like, look, if you love the Black Keys so much, go license the Black Keys. Like, you can get it.
A lot of people did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because I think it's in some ways less problematic than it was, 10, 15 years ago when a lot of the artists that you now hear on TV were not willing to license their music because it was selling out, and now it's actually part of their business plan at the label to get advertising sync. So now you're less in a heavy pressure situation, although I will say it's still happened to us. Client, over email, can you get closer to this 10 track? No, and you cannot even send me this email, So full transparency, Jason's my business partner, so I think he actually knows how we handle this, but we do work with a forensic musicologist whenever we feel like whatever our novel solution to going completely in a different direction hasn't worked or isn't viable, if the client is really hung up on, getting us as close as possible to something, we'll bring him in to listen to what we've done, we'll give him the reference. One of the basic things that actually Jason is always very smart about mentioning on the first call is like trying to get more than one reference, because that can really give you so much more information about what's working about that first piece that they love. If they can give you 2 or 3 pieces that they love,
Find some commonalities.
yeah, you can understand more of structurally, conceptually what's working in those, and then you can also, it gives you more territory with the client to say like, well, we took a little bit of this flavor from this piece and the pacing of this piece, You know, and we know that this piece is really represented well by this instrument, and we kind of played with those elements in one piece. It gives you kind of some new territory to work with, but you know, when I'm writing as a composer, I mean, I oftentimes, it's not about ripping off the tempo, it's about that the editor has cut to the tempo. So if my piece is gonna hit the picture, it's gonna end up wanting to be in the same tempo as their reference track. So that's, you know, that's just like kind of 101 for this kind of work. But I will, you know, I will often, if they're really hot on one reference, and I know I have to kind of, and I know I'm not going to be able to go in a completely different direction, I'll just keep checking in with it throughout the writing process. I'll go back to it and be like, you know, try to keep myself honest and working, you know, not working in a bubble, but sharing my work early with Jason. As a producer, he can put on his, you know, his unbiased hat, and he hasn't fallen in love with the chord progression the way I have, and he can tell me if it's too close. So I think sharing your work early on before you get too invested in what you're doing, because you might not pick up on the infringement that you're doing for some reason. It might just be a blind spot. I also think the blurred lines decision, you know, sort of really, as the musicologist said to me, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be decided this way, but it just sort of demonstrates how unpredictable this process can be legally. So it makes you more aware that, you know, you don't know what's going to happen if it ever went to court. So you really do want to be safe.
Yeah, and I'll listen to a temp once and not listen, and unless there's something really, and I'll try to, if I listen to it more than once, it's because there's some special moment that's happening in a special way, and just try to kind of figure out what's a way to reinvent that, and then forget it exists.
Yeah. Good questions. Yes.
The visual reel that you mentioned before, how long should it be, and like, and how long should each segment be inside the reel?
I think for advertising work, you know, 3 to 5, 30 or 60-second pieces is a good amount of work. I'm really probably not going to dig into a lot more than that unless I'm looking for something specific that I think will be on the 10th piece down. Yeah.
What do you use it all to convert? I'm not talking about something really antiquated, but let's say something that's like a couple years ago.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think
it still has some relevance.
I think if the picture is really dated, I mean, I know I can process what you're doing to really dated picture, but I can't speak for other people. But I know that when we're showing our work to our clients, for example, you know, even if we have a piece of music that's timeless and amazing, if it's, you know, in 4:3 and it looks like it came off a digibeta, there's no way it's gonna go on that reel because it just looks old. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Like if it just looks like an old piece of video.
You know, they say that like car commercials, it seems like car commercials have this kind of thing to them. I was just wondering, okay, cool.
But I would go, you know, if you're gonna rescore, I would go with as current a piece as you can.
I was just real quick going to ask, how do you feel about lumping a bunch of branded commercials into one like music video montage with one piece of music on it? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like if you put like say Google Ford, AT&T, you know, you put like 10 brands or 5 brands where you're doing the highlights of these commercials and then you're like doing a music video.
Yeah, no, I want to see them start to finish. I want to see how the arc of I want to see how the story is told in 30 seconds, because that's what's difficult about scoring in this, is that you really are telling some story, and it's got to have a beginning, middle, and end, and you know, maybe even a moment where it leaves the story for a second, and that all has to happen in a very short amount of time. And so I really want to see.
I agree. I've had that sent to me a few times where it's like a library track was laid on top of a couple different commercials, and it's like, well, this sounds like a track now. It doesn't sound like you scored a commercial.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Alright.
Thank you. Ravi, you mentioned mentioned that, and encouraged actually to submit new tracks that you potentially have not heard before in terms of the style, and there's some freshness that has to be there. Other than that, you already got everything in the library, right? So I can appreciate the first mover's advantage, but also I wonder from your experience how hard it is to pitch something that had not been heard before in terms of it's so different, it's so fresh, it's so new. There must be some kind of aspect of educating the market. So how would you go about that in your experience? Pitching that and selling that, something new that they have not heard before.
Well, I mean, I think for pitches where we're pitching a bunch of tracks for one spot, we're never really in a position of advocating on a track-by-track basis. It's more of like, here's a bunch of things that fit your brief, some closer than others, and maybe you'll be delighted by the one thing that nails the brief dead on, or maybe you'll be delighted by the one thing that's surprising and different and doesn't sound like all the other music that they heard. So I don't think you can overthink the process. I think the music should just be, authentic and relevant and current and well produced, on trend. But if it's not on trend, and what I mean by on trend, like what you're just starting to hear in film and TV, if it's not that, if it's just something completely unique to you, that's great. We'll kind of decide as we listen to music whether it's worth pitching for a certain project, and then ultimately it's up to whatever happens in that room when they go through 500 files from 5 different companies, which is probably not a bad estimate in some cases. And again, from my experience, sometimes winning the job can be completely nailing the brief, and sometimes winning the job can be being the surprising curveball after their ears are tired from hearing a million things that vaguely fit the brief, and then they heard this one surprising thing. So you never know. So I would just kind of try to listen to what's happening now and write something that's completely unique.
Can we take a pause there for a second and just get you guys to comment on something you wrote that was totally outside of your wheelhouse in that moment that worked? Maybe Lewis, you brought up the band Mambo.
Yeah, well, I mean, writing a mambo wasn't out of my wheelhouse, it was out of their wheelhouse. Do you mean like a creative pitch that was
Yeah,
not
like
what
something
people
that
were looking for?
or something that like was a mark of personal growth, I guess, for your compositional life in his context. Eric, you know this off the top of your head.
Yeah, well, what I'll say is that, the guy that works with me is a fantastic guitarist, and he's like virtuosic and will melt your face off type of thing. Like, he's got the shredding skills. And so obviously whenever we get a guitar demo in, I'm like, all right, Frank, you're getting to work. And so he will do that. I am like a high school guitarist at best. I sound like I'm in a high school rock band. And frequently a brief comes in that's like, we need an indie sound. We need kind of not too polished, not too perfect, whatever. And he does a thing that's like, wow, man, that's some skills right there. And then I get to work and I'm like, all right, here's 1, stop. All right, here's 4, here's 5. And I'm like, all right, I think we got a hit. And it's like, for some reason, the thing is like, the not polished version of it somehow worked because there was an authenticity of like, I played a real guitar, like I didn't use a MIDI guitar, I played a real bass, even though I'm worse at bass than I am at guitar, things like that. Like it was like, it became like this like, oh, it's kind of like an indie punk band that doesn't play in time. And it sold, and it was great. And so in terms of achievements, I'm always like, man, I always feel so bad because he's definitely the trained guitarist of the group, but whatever. If it's selling and if it works for the visual, then that's all the better. That's ultimately, I want to grow as a guitarist, but I'm also like, yeah, I like my high school skills. These work for that specific request. No, I've done in terms of stupid things, or weird requests. We did cats rapping We've done cats doing bluegrass, not because my company name is Soundcat, just coincidentally purely. We've done, I mean, like, going back to about like jack of all trades and like having people know you by things, you can still be the jack of all trades, but just have different people know you for different things. And so like some people knew me, like that first, you know, sort of my first endeavor in it, I was conducting like a string orchestra, and we were doing like aleatoric new music stuff. So they called me for orchestral stuff because that's what they figured I did and I do. And it worked, and I won all my orchestral spots. But then like I met somebody else right around the same time who saw me DJing at like a Lower East Side bar, and it was like, oh, you do hip hop? And I'm like, yeah, I did all the, like I have all this like hip hop stuff from college that like I produced a couple of groups. And then they're like, great, you're gonna do all our hip hop stuff. And it's like, those two are basically polar opposite, but who cares? That one person knows me as the hip hop specialist. One person knows me as an orchestral specialist. It's like that. Kind of all like, I always get a chuckle sometimes when somebody's like, oh wait, can we call you for like the indie rock band? And I'm like, yep, you can. All in on that.
Yeah.
I had a question about the percentage of live instruments to stuff from in the box. Do you have a percentage that's different every time?
For me, it's different every time, and then I think what I was saying earlier, I do think live instrumentation is making a comeback in terms of like producing skills in the sort of like home studio world of like, I'm sitting in front of a computer, I know how to make a big orchestra sound like a big orchestra, but what else can I do? Like my MIDI guitar sound like crap, so it's like, let me break out a real guitar, and then it's like, man, the solo violin sample is just not doing it for me. Like, let me like saw away for a second, and then all of a sudden I'm like recording 50% of the instruments. That's more on like a John Bryan-y type of brief, where that's like kind of the thing involved in it. Because I do think that there are like at least 60 to 70% of my demos are 100% in the box. That like, that was the request. It was like, we need this, we needed it by the end of the day, go. You know, and it's like, okay, great, here's your hip hop beat. It's like, I'm not going in the booth and like playing my real piano. I'm just loading up the piano, doing nothing.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's always a mix, and the mix is different depending on the style of music and the amount of time we have and the budget we have. The goal is always to make as much of it live as possible, and we always sort of advocate that goal with our clients, that like we always at least, you know, get it into the conversation. It'd be great to do this live if we have the time, if we have the money, and we leave it to what they think they can, you know, sort of make happen. But I agree that I feel like we're in a better place than we were 10 years ago, because a lot of the great players that I know that I've worked with, you know, I may not have the time or budget to get them into the studio face to face, but now they can record themselves at home and send tracks over, and that's really made it possible.
I was going to ask that too, like how much do you farm out some stuff, you know, because you have a track, but you want to put something live on there to just sparkle it up a little bit.
I think that's always hugely beneficial. I always like working with people in the same room because I feel like I can communicate better and maybe we'll get a better performance, but that's not always the case with advertising, where you're like, I need 10 woodwind parts and like I need them in 2 hours. So who can do it? You know, and then you give you a call and you're like, I got you covered. And you just send back 4 stems and we're like, great, this is done. No, you send back 10 stems.
You're like, as a composer, you're just like a link in this chain of people in the production, and so, you know, yeah, I would love to work with everybody, you know, come into the studio, have a, you know, cup of coffee, chat, you know, put up a microphone, but now, a lot of times we're on projects where it's like, it's really helpful to me if I can send this to this drummer and have him start recording drums while I move on to writing the other version I have to write that day. So,
Or finishing that.
yeah. So yeah, remote recording is huge, and it's great. That's why I mentioned earlier, you know, when there are composers that contact me, I like to know if they also, you know, play an instrument, because usually somebody who's looking to get into media recording, if they play an instrument, they're capable of recording it. So that's good to know. Yeah, but it's always a mix, and you know, we try to. I always sort of try to advocate for writing to your strengths in a situation. So, like for example, we worked on a trailer for a video game a few years ago. We knew it wasn't going to be a full orchestral budget, but it needed to be big and epic. And I wrote to the brass, and I wrote in some guitar parts and some percussion, and we brought in brass and percussion, and we left all the strings sampled. But I knew going into writing that piece what parts needed to shine that we were going to be able to record. I didn't go in there, you know, sort of mad that they weren't going to pay for my strings and disappointed with how they sounded. I just wrote to the strengths of that budget.
Yeah, similar experience. I mean, I'm usually not making those decisions. I'm being told this is what you have, and you know, sometimes it's 100% the box, and sometimes it's some live, sometimes it's all live.
I guess, I mean, in terms of demos, does live help you sell the track or not necessarily?
Yeah. Yeah, I can. I mean, I think it's what I forget which one you made it earlier. That you want the demo version, VO1, you know, the original demo should be broadcast. So, in the sense that maybe you might be recording, you know, strings later, like you want them to believe that you already recorded them. So, in a certain sense, it's like it's a double-edged sword because you want it to be good enough that they believe that we don't need to do this, and yet you want them to also pay for it and be like, great, like we're so excited about this that we're going to make it even better. But then they're probably going to feel like, well, this sounds good enough.
I had a spot once where it had a sampled saxophone on it, and then we replaced it, and the client preferred the sampled saxophone.
I definitely had that happen with pianos. Like it just kind of is what it is. There's a certain thing too. The piano thing I'm thinking of, it was like a very metronomic thing that was very specifically locked into picture. And then when we recorded piano, it was a human performance, and and then we like tried to edit it to be like quantized in a way, and it's like this sounds like a bad edit. And then it's like, well, can't we just go with the other piano? And I was like, oh, you mean my upright that's in my studio? Sure. Like, here it is.